If you guessed that I wrote the script for Herald of the Sun before I saw the first 4 hero trees and saw the devs' notes on their design philosophy, you were spot on. I'm actually writing this addendum late at night on Christmas, and as of the time I'm writing this, I've read nothing about Herald of the Sun specifically. Lightsmith's first draft has been out for a week, and for a week we've seen their plan to make Templar be all about Wake of Ashes, but not a peep about Herald of the Sun. What I have heard about Blizzard's general philosophies is it's a little disturbing. They have a sad tendency to make the focus of their hero trees be buffing a single ability. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that is too narrow a focus. They're putting all their eggs in one basket with that design plan, and they're setting themselves up to fail. Oh, they'll add talents buffing random other abilities and or stats in each tree, but I still think having a broader theme would be more appealing to more players. There's something else that I've thought of that I have to say somewhere, and I'm running out of options. So I see some space at the beginning of my Herald of the Sun script, so this is where I'm saying it. This kind of makes you wonder how often that kind of thinking determines where Blizzard puts their talents, but I'm getting off topic. Again. I have a guess as to why Blizzard is focusing on buffing one ability at a time with their hero trees. They're hoping to release more hero trees when Midnight gets released, and more hero trees again when the Last Titan gets released, and so on and so forth for as long as World of Warcraft continues to be a thing. They want hero talents to be something they can expand on indefinitely without having to deal with issues like spellbar bloat. This year they're adding a Keeper of the Grove hero tree that buffs Treants. Next year they might add a Scion of Aenar hero tree that buffs Wrath and colors it green again. The year after they might add a Celestial Supplicant tree that buffs Moonfire and Sunfire. If I'm right, then, well, it's a good thing that they're looking for solutions, looking for ways to keep the classes evolving and expanding sustainably. But unfortunately, this isn't a good implementation. It requires them to come up with 11 talents each time, it throttles the amount of awesomeness that we can receive per expansion, it pretty much puts a force multiplier on any mistakes Blizzard makes in their designs. And they will make some mistakes, and mistakes are inevitable. By focusing on one ability, it makes it so much easier to botch a hero tree, since if that one ability sucks, or the way they buff it makes it suck for whatever reason, or even if the appeal for that one ability is too narrow, then the whole hero tree will suck. And if they make one hero tree suck, that'll kill player choice, since only 2 new choices will ever be available to each character in each expansion. This is why I'm calling it a force multiplier. Mistakes will hit the player much, much harder if Blizzard has such a narrow theme for their hero trees. Hero talents they're just not a good way to sustainably keep the classes evolving. A much better and simpler solution would be SoulSoBreezy's mods concept, where you can replace one ability in your kit with something else that's a variation on its main theme. You can swap out Crusader Strike for Blessed Hammer. You can swap out Consecration for Holy Wrath. You can mix and match these to create whatever build you like. Each expansion could add a few new mod abilities per spec, so the risk would be more spread out. His concept is a lot like the upgrade concept I have in my videos, and in a lot of my previous videos for that matter. Plus, it's sustainable. It's simpler because the devs wouldn't have to come up with umpteen passives each time, and they wouldn't have the risks of putting all their eggs in one basket. All that being said, hero talents are a great way to get players excited for the War Within expansion, if they're done correctly. And it's my sincere hope that Blizzard is ready to pivot on just about anything and everything so that they can make hero talents work and add awesome to the game and get players excited instead of jaded. Okay. Now that I've ranted for probably a little too long, time to get to my favorite hero tree so far, which is also the one that Blizzard hasn't announced anything about as of the time I'm writing this, which isn't a promising correlation, but this run-on sentence has completely lost its focus, so I'll end it here and start talking about my ideal Herald of the Sun talents already. The Herald of the Sun hero tree is the tree that I was looking forward to the most. As I was putting together the first draft for this video, I actually went over this tree last of all. I wanted the flavor of a Retribution / Holy tree to be damage for healing and healing for damage. That might not be what Blizzard is thinking, of course. With a name like Herald of the Sun, they might have something else in mind, buffing the Hades out of Light of Dawn or something like that. I mean, Keeper of the Grove was about buffing the Hades out of Treants, so it's kinda within Blizzard's character to focus on buffing just one ability with these hero trees. I kind of hope they don't resort to that too much. I think general healing for damage and damage for healing would be more fun and more exciting for players than just focusing on buffing one ability. That said, I fully intend to pull in as many solar-themed names and animations as possible to make the name Herald of the Sun as fitting as possible. On that note, I knew Selfless Healer had to go someplace in the Herald tree, but when I realized I wanted damage for healing and healing for damage to be my tree's overall flavor, I decided to put it at Tier 1. Selfless Healer's effect is that the effective healing you do causes you to do extra holy damage with your auto attacks over the next 10 seconds for Retribution, while doing damage causes you to do extra healing with your Holy Shock, Holy Light, Flash of Light / Radiant Bolt spells for the next 10 seconds for Holy. I have in mind a system a bit like Ignite, where the healing or damage gets banked and then spent automatically over time. By putting this talent here, everything that I do for healing or for damage in the Herald of the Sun tree would fit that damage for healing and healing for damage flavor. Everything. Not to make it sound like I'm trying to be lazy and not come up with other ways to get healing from damage or damage from healing, I'm trying to set myself up for success with this first tier. We'll see how well I did as we go. Though I should say, it might be wiser on my part to have damage spells copy their damage to your beaconed target as healing. I don't know if that's the best way to go or not. The system in this first iteration is making you actually cast direct heals to get the damage for healing. Maybe that's better, I don't know. It's at least a different feel from atonement healing, but then again, a system where damage for healing only goes to your beaconed target would also feel different from atonement healing. Depending on the feedback I get, I might switch to damage directly healing your beacon target in my next draft, or maybe not. Anyhow, on to Tier 2. On the left, we've got Fist of the Heavens. It's got a longer cooldown and does more damage than Judgment, and instantly heals up to 3 allies near your target, replacing Judgment. Yes, this is a classic Diablo ability that never quite made it into World of Warcraft, even though it probably would have made the game a lot more fun if it had been there since vanilla. I worry a little that it might be redundant with Holy Prism, but if it is, oh well. It's still cool and it still fits with the tree's theme, as long as the animation uses a sunbeam theme to it instead of Diablo 3's lightning aesthetic, and I think it should. In the middle, we've got Solar Storm. Enemies who take damage from Divine Storm, Denounce, or Shield of the Righteous also receive a jolt of radiant damage after 2 seconds, and when Light of Dawn heals 3 or more allies without doing any overhealing, it casts again. These effects both have a cooldown. Now, you'd think the Light of Dawn spell would have an upgrade in here, considering that it is the biggest holy spell that has sun flavor to it. Well, I could see myself making Solar Storm an upgrade for both Divine Storm and Light of Dawn that does AoE healing and damage, but I've done that kind of thing in Templar and in Lightsmith. So instead I thought I can buff the Light of Dawn spell in the passive talents rather than in the active ones. So that's just what I did. I added the effect on Divine Storm as well, since I can't just buff Holy's healing output with this. I threw in Shield of the Righteous as well when I realized I might as well buff Holy's damage with this new talent. And now for one of my all-time favorite upgrades, Radiant Bolt, an upgrade to Flash of Light, slightly higher mana cost and higher healing than Flash of Light, but can be cast on enemies to deal damage. For each holy power you spend, the cast time of your next Radiant Bolt is reduced by 20%, its effect is boosted by a percentage, and its chance to generate 1 holy power is increased by 20%, stacking up to 5 times. I really want a ranged damage ability with no cooldown, preferably one that, like Flash of Light, can consume Infusion of Light procs. Those can reduce the cooldown of Holy Shock if you've got the Imbued Infusions talent. Now, the other talents that buff Radiant Bolt are coming up, but I'd like to add that those talents change its character, what it can and cannot be used to do, quite a bit. And I'd like to say that the Light Celerity talent that makes Flash instant for Retribution affects this, but given the stacking buff, it's not going to make that huge a difference. I'd like to think that casting an instant Radiant Bolt to heal an ally would provide enough Selfless Healer holy damage to make up for the fact that a global cooldown just got spent on something that isn't damage. In fact, I'd like to think that Selfless Healer does a heck of a lot for that kind of thing. I'm not sure the numbers are balanceable, but if they aren't, then the whole stinking hero tree will need to change anyway. I'd like to add that I hope that this wouldn't cause too much rotation bloat for Retribution, because I'm hoping they'd only cast this when they're actually doing some off-healing to benefit from Selfless Healer. Ideally, the direct damage wouldn't be worth it in general, except in cases where they can't get into melee for whatever reason, but the healing would be worth it if they can get the full effect of healing. Originally, I was going to call this Holy Bolt, but then I realized the more sun flavor in the naming, the better, considering that the name of the tree is Herald of the Sun. Then I realized that making Flash of Light's upgrade so that it has a different school from Holy means that even if Holy Light got interrupted, you'd still have a direct hard cast heal that wouldn't be stopped from casting, which makes for an interesting twist. A fun little fact. There's this one time when I got the idea of having Natural Light as an upgrade for Flash of Light that was simply in the Nature School instead of the Holy School, and this was for a concept that was way before the announcement of hero talents, which I'm getting way off the topic of here, so I will cut this rant short and move on to Tier 3. On the far left, we've got Sunstroke. Up to 3 additional enemies within 8 yards of their Fist of the Heavens target take 50% damage, and all on-hit effects from your Judgment spell are applied to those enemies. This additional target effect stacks with the Blessed Champion talent. I wanted something that applies the Judgment of Light debuff to multiple targets, and I should probably explain the reasoning in light of the next talent, which is Soothing Light. Up to 6 allies near the target of your Fist of the Heavens receive instant healing instead of 3, and the healing and single target damage are both increased. The idea was that Sunstroke, when it applies multiple Judgment of Light debuffs, can heal allies for more, but over a longer period of time, whereas Soothing Sunlight can heal allies more quickly. In practice, I think it'll be more about the number of targets healed than how quickly the healing happens, depending on if you're a raid or a 5-man, I guess. Also, I realized at the last second that I could make this a single-target versus multi-target choice if I buffed Fist of the Heavens single-target damage with Soothing Sunlight. Maybe that's a bit of a cop-out, but the fact that I forgot to intentionally make a talent appealing for both Retribution and Holy is a pretty big mistake on my part, and I hope I don't have more brain farts like that. I probably already have, and I'm not proud to admit it. In any case, in the middle of Tier 3 we've got Solar Reflection. Casting Holy Shock or Blade of Justice to damage an enemy causes up to 2 injured nearby allies to be healed, and this talent also passively increases all your holy damage by a small percentage. Admittedly, this is something of an odd man out talent. I realized at some point that I needed some passives to drop into the middle, and that I needed some passives that buff Holy Shock and Blade of Justice, so I whipped this up. If I'm told that either Radiant Bolt or Fist of the Heavens sucks, I might just make a Solar Shock talent that combines Blade of Justice and Holy Shock. I'm not sure what the effects would be. It's hard to picture Holy Shock producing 2 holy power at a time, but it would be insanely powerful, which might be exactly why people would want me to do it. I'd have to make sure something was in it for Retribution, though, like, I don't know, the heals 2 other people thing that I got going on now with Solar Reflection, which might make for a nice subsequent pick 1 talent. I'd better stop here before I talk myself into changing this iteration. I like Fist of the Heavens and I like Radiant Bolt, and I think they're both really fitting for Herald of the Sun, which brings me to the talents that buff Radiant Bolt. The first one is Focused Sunlight. For Retribution, this further buffs the damage increase that Radiant Bolt receives from spending Holy Power. For Holy, the mana cost of Radiant Bolt is refunded when you use it to damage an enemy, and consuming Infusion of Light by casting Radiant Bolt on an enemy doubles Radiant Bolt's damage instead of refunding mana. For both, this increases the amount healed. I knew just what Radiant Bolt needed, a straight-up buff to single-target damage and healing. After all, Fist of the Heavens is group healing and AoE damage, or at least it can be, so I needed a single-target healing and damage to offset that. And this next one has a name that you might not have expected. Sundog. Casting Radiant Bolt on an enemy causes it to ricochet to an injured ally nearby, healing them. For those of you who don't know, a Sundog is to ice crystals what a rainbow is to water droplets, though the way light interacts with the ice crystals is quite a bit different from how it interacts with liquid water. Rainbows are on the opposite side of the sky from the sun, for example, while Sundogs are actually quite close to the sun, which brings me to why I picked the name. Having your damage ricochet off your target and heal a nearby ally, just like how Sundogs are near the sun in the sky whenever they show up, sounds like it's a great way to rack up both healing and damage. For Holy, this is simply a neat gimmick that lets you deal direct damage while healing, and of course that damage will make your next few direct heals a bit more effective. For Retribution, you get some instant healing on an ally, some instant damage on an enemy, and of course the banked healing makes your auto attacks more effective. I figure this is a terrific damage for healing mechanic, will look awesome, will just plain and simple be fun to use, and I really, really want it in the game. As for Tier 4, now we're getting to the bits that really ought to be super powerful, and I sure hope my imagination didn't fail me. If it did, in my defense, I was kind of out of it the days I was writing this script. Sinus Pressure drops my energy and my IQ all at the same time, and I'm half expecting to see comments saying, yeah, it shows. But on to the Tier 4 Herald of the Sun hero talents. On the left, we've got Glorious Sunlight. Word of Glory's healing is increased by a flat percentage, a percentage that's much higher for Retribution. And in addition, the damage of Templar's Verdict and Crusader Strike are increased, and the healing of Holy Light is increased. This is one of those no nuance talents. At first I was just going to have it just buff Word of Glory, full stop, and the idea was that a Retribution Paladin could use it to spot heal and bank enough Selfless healer damage to get more damage out via auto attack buffs than they'd have gotten from casting Templar's Verdict. I am not sure how good an idea that is, so I decided to straight up buff other abilities both for Holy and for Retribution. I aimed to pick abilities that I hadn't yet buffed. In the middle, we've got Anshay's Favor. For Holy, your Mastery increases your Holy damage dealt, and it increases the single target damage of Denounce and Shield of the Righteous. For Retribution, your Mastery increases your healing, and your mana pool and mana regeneration are greatly increased. This is the off-specking talent for Herald of the Sun, intended to let Retribution off-heal and intended to let Holy off-DPS. Of course, it'll be spectacular for Holy Paladins who solo, like me, but I figure it's also generally a smart idea to enable off-specking in general. Heck, Heavenly Strength in my Templar tree would probably be a must-have for soloing protection players too, now that I think about it. I had to name something after Anshay in this tree, and this felt like it was a good one to go with. Finally, we've got Conviction. It's a straight-up increased percent chance to critically hit. This one is no nuance. Both Holy and Retribution will benefit from crit, so here it is. We had something similar in Vanilla as a next-to-last talent, but the name Holy Power is taken, so I went with Conviction. Finally, we are at Tier 5, where we have Holy Radiance. Launches a ball of light forward that heals allies and damages enemies. At first, I had Heaven's Fury here. I figure Blizzard is going to take Heaven's Fury, give it to priests, and paladins will never forgive them for it. It'll be like Clash all over again. But Holy Radiance, at least the Uther version of it from Heroes of the Storm, really ought to be brought into Paladins kits at some point. I can think of no better place to add Holy Radiance than as a capstone for a Holy/Retribution shared talent tree. One thing that I worry about a little is that this will introduce rotation bloat for Retribution. Ideally, they'd only cast this if allies needed the healing so that they could derive the most benefit from Selfless Healer, so maybe it's not as big a problem for rotation bloat as I'm afraid it is. When I think about what I've done with Retribution's hero talents in Templar and Herald, the upgrade abilities are either taking abilities they're already using as part of their regular rotation, or else the usage of the new abilities is highly situational and will either be used as an opener or in scenarios that they'd react to by providing healing for their group. So maybe I've actually picked exactly the right way to introduce new abilities for Retribution without aggravating rotation bloat. I don't know. Feedback, as always, would be greatly appreciated. So that's the last of the 3 of my first draft hero talents. I sure hope I've managed to not be super cringe, to throw out at least a few decent ideas, maybe even show how these trees can come together, or how a foundational passive at Tier 1 can completely set the tone and lay the foundation for the whole hero tree. If there is one thing I'd hope makes it into War Within, it would be Radiant Bolt, hands down. But We'll see what Blizzard actually gives us. I sure hope it involves some new active abilities, even if they just replace existing abilities. Alright, that was the original script I had for the Herald of the Sun Ideal Talents, and again, it is my favorite of the three. And of course, my favorite upgraded spell was obviously Radiant Bolt. I've been pining for a ranged direct damage spell with no cooldown since Legion, ever since they made the misguided decision to prune Denounce. And I still pine for one now that Denounce came back as a finisher rather than as a filler. I could do a whole different video on how I think every spec should have at least one ranged damage ability with no cooldown, and every spec should have at least one multi-target damage ability with either no cooldown or a very short cooldown, and about how I'd make that happen if Blizzard put me in charge. But these days I think giving Blizzard feedback on the hero talent system is a wiser use of my time. Now, one of my biggest criticisms regarding the hero trees Blizzard has been putting out is that all too often their appeal is far, far too narrow because they tend to focus on buffing just one ability as far as the tree's main flavor goes. There are other passives in the trees, of course, but the main flavor is all too often just about one ability. Just imagine that I had the idea in my head that this putting all your eggs in one basket thing, this buff just one ability per hero tree thing, was a good concept. Just imagine if I believed that, and that I had made Herald of the Sun with that philosophy in mind and made Radiant Bolt the centerpiece of the tree rather than making it one of a few options for how to buff your damage and or healing. That would have been a disaster, probably in a lot of ways that I haven't even thought about. I've read Lightsmith feedback and other players thought of things I hadn't thought of. So other players who look at this abomination of a concept will undoubtedly see problems that I don't see. And I'm already seeing quite a few problems right off the bat. I mean, Radiant Bolt would basically make casting Flash of Light's equivalent a requirement for Retribution, and Retribution already has quite a lot of spells in their rotation as it is. Even if things like Selfless Healer made it worth it, which is to say Selfless Healer made it optimal for min-maxing your DPS to cast Radiant Bolt to heal allies, and even if the passive effects I attach to Radiant Bolt to make it instant and make it create some holy power and all of that stuff were in place, and even if it could ricochet off of your main target and heal someone else and you'd still get some benefits from that, it still may not be fun for Retribution to use it. And it probably wouldn't be exciting for Retribution players to have to cast a variation of Flash of Light for them to get the most out of the new hero tree. For Holy this would be okay, but I can't just think about Holy when I'm designing a tree like this. It has to be fun and exciting for both Retribution and for Holy. Honestly, I think making Radiant Bolt an option and making my ideal Herald of the Sun tree just generally be about damage for healing and healing for damage is a much wiser way of doing things. It can appeal to more players that way. You want to do some direct healing as Ret? Good. Okay, fine, cool. Radiant Bolt and Holy Radiance are your friends. But if you want extra healing as a bonus while you're DPSing, then hey, Fist of the Heavens for the win. Maybe send out a Holy Radiance Orb if there's a lot of raid damage. Bada bing, bada boom. Letting players customize and pick what they want has got to be better than just focusing on a single ability. And there's less risk because in a system that's focusing on one ability, making a mistake with that one ability spoils the whole tree. And in a system where there's only 2 trees per expansion, spoiling one tree completely eliminates player choice. Blizzard is setting themselves up to fail. By contrast, having multiple abilities be buffed with a broader theme for the tree as a whole spreads that risk out and sets Blizzard up for success. At least that's the way I see it. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. I hope I haven't worn out the phrase feedback would be appreciated because it would be.